from the Khandhasamyutta, which is my favorite, probably part of my favorite Nikaya, partly because it's deep and addresses the problem of suffering and impermanence and the 5 khandhas themselves. The 5 khandhas are the components of existence. So that basically means body or any kind of materiality, feeling, which Ajahn Brahm likes to translate as experience, the experience of pleasure, pain, and somewhere, anything in between. So the affective tone of experience, if you like, and perception, the perceptual apparatus of the mind, and the reactive part of the mind, or the volition or will, which is a whole heap of karma, and also consciousnesses. There are 6 types. And basically, this is how a human being can be defined, how any being, any sentient being can be defined, just in terms of these 5 khandhas, which encompass what a human or any being actually is. There's nothing beyond that. There's nothing outside that. This is basically what makes us up. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit. There's a sort of brief passage that's very similar to the passage in the Anatalakkhana Sutta, one of my favorite suttas, but it begins with a story. So I thought you might like to have a little bit of a story, and in that time I can also enjoy hearing the Dhamma rather than being the one to try to explain it. So for anyone who is here for the first time, this isn't actually a sutta class. This is more of a sutta discussion. So the idea is we take themes, we pick up on certain teachings that really speak to us and that we can try and relate to our lives, so that it's not an abstract kind of doctrine that we have to master, but it's something that can inform and enrich and guide us in our lives to live more aligned to the Dhamma. So it is called the Alms Gatherer, and it's from the Khandhasamyutta, which is chapter 22 of this huge book, the Samyutta Nikaya, and it's number 80 in that book. So in my version, it's on page 918, but don't worry if you don't have the version or the book with you, because I'm going to read it out. Sometimes a link is put in the box to Sutta Central, which may have a different translation, or you might be able to find Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation there. I like Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. It's the first. And I think, later translations are good, but they are kind of based on this. Bhikkhu Bodhi's done the work around the grammar and, the semantics, and then tweaks have been made. But I think he's a brilliant translator. So here we go. I'll read probably through. Do you want me to read the whole thing first? It's 3 pages. What do you think? Or would it be too much? Yeah, I'll just go for it. And if it becomes a bit much to digest, just put your hand up or put a message in the chat and we can comment, especially if there's anything you actually don't understand in the text, which, needs clarifying in order to really get the best out of this. So here we go. We can have a fuller discussion at the end. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling among the Sakyans at Kapilavatthu in Nigroda's park. Then the Blessed One, that's the Buddha, having dismissed the bhikkhus for a particular reason, dressed in the morning and, taking bowl and robe, entered Kapilavatthu for alms. When he'd walked for alms in Kapilavatthu and had returned from the alms round after his meal, he went to the great wood for the day's abiding. Having plunged into the great wood, he sat down at the foot of a beluva sapling for the day's abiding. I think a beluva is like a bibitaki. It's one of the Ayurvedic medicines that I studied in my degree, a medicinal tree. And it's just interesting to notice that even today, we tend to work in the mornings in the monasteries, which may include alms round, but it certainly includes doing everything that's needed to get fed, to sustain ourselves, which includes things the Buddha never had to do, such as writing newsletters or creating websites, but it's all part of it. And then we have our meal. And then if we're fortunate, we can go into a forest or a secluded place, which might be just our room, or it might be a hut for the day's abiding, which basically means sitting down and meditating. Then, while the Blessed One was alone in seclusion, a reflection arose in his mind thus: the Sangha of bhikkhus has been dismissed by me. There are bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, by the way, but usually he's addressing the senior most people in the audience. So unfortunately, because most of history and records are written by men, they tend to miss out mentioning the whole assembly. So hopefully there were many more people there too. So let's say monastics. There are monastics here who are newly ordained, not long gone forth, recently come to this Dhamma and discipline. That's the Dhamma Vinaya. If they do not see me, there may take place in them some alteration or change. Just as when a young calf does not see its mother, there may take place in it some alteration or change. So too, there are monastics here who are newly ordained, not long gone forth, recently come to this Dhamma and discipline. If they do not see me, there may take place in them some alteration or change. Just as when young seedlings do not get water, there may take place in them some alteration or change. I have to say, some of my plants had a bit of alteration and change happening while I was away. So too, there are monastics here who are newly ordained, not long gone forth, recently come to this Dhamma and discipline. If they do not see me, there may take place in them some alteration or change. Let me assist the Sangha of monastics now, just as I've assisted it in the past. So it seems that the Buddha has gone away, maybe on retreat for some time, alone in seclusion. And now, out of compassion, he realizes that the Sangha need him. So out of compassion, he assists them. Then Brahma Sahampati, having known with his own mind the reflection in the Blessed One's mind, just as quickly as a strong person might extend their drawn-in arm or draw in their extended arm, disappeared from the Brahma world and reappeared before the Blessed One. He arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, just like this, raised his joined hands in reverential salutation towards the Blessed One, and said to him, "So it is, Blessed One, so it is, Fortunate One. The Sangha of bhikkhus has been dismissed by the Buddha, by the Blessed One. There are monastics here who are newly ordained, etc., including the similes." So I won't read that again. "If they do not see the Blessed One, there may take place in them some alteration or change. Venerable Sir, let the Blessed One take delight in the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let the Blessed One welcome the Sangha of bhikkhus. Let the Blessed One assist the Sangha of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, monastics, now just as he has assisted it in the past." The Blessed One consented by silence. Then Brahma Sahampati, having understood the Blessed One's consent, paid homage to the Blessed One, and, keeping him on his right, he disappeared right there. Then, in the evening, the Blessed One emerged from seclusion and went to Nigroda's park. He sat down in the appointed seat and performed such a feat of spiritual power that the monastics would come to him, alone and in pairs, in a timid manner. Then those monastics approached the Blessed One, alone and in pairs and in a timid manner. Having approached, they paid homage to the Blessed One and sat down to one side. The Blessed One then said to them, so here we go. This is the teaching of the Buddha to the monastics who've been listening to him for some time. Monastics, this is the lowest form of livelihood, that is, gathering alms. In the world, this is a term of abuse. You alms gatherer, you roam around with a begging bowl in your hand. So that was a term of abuse in the Buddha's day. And yet, monastics, clans, people intent on the good, take up that way of life for a valid reason. It is not because they've been driven to it by kings that they do so, nor because they've been driven to it by thieves, nor owing to debt, nor from fear, nor to earn a livelihood. But they do so with the thought, I am immersed in birth, aging, and death, in sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. I'm immersed in suffering, oppressed by suffering. Perhaps an ending of this entire mass of suffering might be discerned. It is in such a way, monastics, that this clansman, or that a clansperson, has gone forth. Yet they are covetous, inflamed by lust for sensual pleasures, with a mind full of ill will, with intentions corrupted by hate, muddle-minded, lacking clear comprehension, unconcentrated, or let's say without samadhi, or unstilled, scatterbrained. One of you said you were feeling scattered. It's okay, we all feel scatterbrained sometimes. Loose in their sense faculties. Just as a brand from a funeral pyre, burning at both ends and smeared with excretion in the middle, cannot be used as timber either in the village or in the forest. In just such a way do I speak about this person. They've missed out on the enjoyments of a householder, yet they do not fulfill the goal of asceticism. So that's that middle ground when we've given up the worldly life and all the distractions and sensuality and pleasures that can be found there, and yet there's still lust and ill will, hate, muddle-mindedness, lacking clear comprehension, a lack of concentration, scatterbrained, and looseness in sense faculties. So we haven't yet fulfilled the goal of asceticism. There are, monastics, these three kinds of unwholesome thoughts. Sensual thought, that's thoughts of lust or thoughts of sensuality. Anything related to the five senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Thoughts of ill will and thoughts of harming. And where, monastics, do these three unwholesome thoughts cease without remainder? For one who dwells with a mind well established in the four establishments, or as Shambram likes to translate, focuses of mindfulness, that's the four satipatthanas, or for one who develops the signless concentration, or the signless samadhi. This is reason enough, monastics, to develop the signless samadhi. When signless samadhi is developed and cultivated, monastics, it is of great fruit and benefit. Now, we're going ahead a little bit here, aren't we? Because this is quite deep. So should we have a little bit of discussion already, perhaps, around... maybe I can just tell you what I've discovered from the commentaries about this signless samadhi. It's actually called Animitta Ceto Samadhi. And sometimes it's called Animitta Ceto Vimutti because basically there's a liberation of the mind based on that samadhi. Sometimes samadhi is defined anyway as vimokkha, which is like the liberations of mind. So jhana and above is usually described as vimokkha. So it seems that none of the suttas are particularly clear as to what this means, but it seems to be quite a deep stage, which could be synonymous with nibbana, because it seems to come after the four jhanas and the four formless attainments. And there's another place, two other places in the suttas where there are three types of samadhi that are paired together as a set, and that is sunyata samadhi, which is the samadhi based on insight into the emptiness of the self. Sunyata is emptiness. And nimitta samadhi, which there is described as the kind of samadhi that occurs based on insight into impermanence. I wouldn't be surprised if these are the same states of mind, just approached through a slightly different lens of insight. So one might be approached through, more of the lens of non-self, Another through the lens of impermanence, which seems to be the animitta, the signless samadhi that's referred to here. And the last one is appanihita samadhi, which, according to the commentaries, is approached through the lens of suffering. So seeing that there is, seeing through the happiness of the world and seeing it as suffering. And this leads to a freedom, again, that's synonymous, perhaps, with nibbana. But nobody quite knows this for sure. It does seem to be a very elevated stage. And I think there is a talk that Ajahn Brahm gives about all three of those, actually. I'm not sure if he says sunyata, but he definitely talks about animitta and appanihita samadhi. And I think it's in 2014. Can't quite remember the talk title, but if you want to check it out, you can go to that talk. It's really beautiful. So don't think these things are like completely out of reach. This is in a way the promise of the Buddha, that by contemplating impermanence, suffering, and non-self, we have a chance to transcend even deep meditation and go beyond all suffering. So those three together are known in the commentaries, I think in the Visuddhimagga, as the triple gateway to liberation. So just hold it lightly. Don't land on a definition or, get into kind of too much scholarism around it, because that can go on forever and ever. But just to know that there is something beyond, the realm of permanence, the realm of, delusion of permanence, of happiness in this world, and also of self. And I would go so far as to say there's something beyond the realm of impermanence too. We can call that the unconditioned or the realm beyond conditions. It's not really a realm, but it's the end of conditions. So interesting that it starts with the three kinds of unwholesome thoughts and says that they cease without remainder, either in a mind well established in the four focuses or the four satipatthanas, four focuses of mindfulness, or for one who develops the signless samadhi. Shall I continue, or do you want to ask any questions and have some discussion already on what we've discussed? We do have time to complete it, shall we? Yes, no? Okay, who's for completing? Hands up? Yeah? All right, we keep reading through. So there are monastics, these two views. The view of existence, that's bhavaditti, and the view of extermination, vibhavaditti, both wrong views. There in monastics, the instructed noble disciple reflects thus: is there anything in the world that I could cling to without being blameworthy? They understand thus: there's nothing in the world that I could cling to without being blameworthy. For if I should cling, it's only form that I would be clinging to. So this is where the Candas come in, the 5 components. Only feeling, Vedana. Only perception, Sanya. Only volitional formations, Sankhara. And only consciousness or consciousnesses, Vijnana, that I would be clinging to. With that clinging of mine as condition, there would be existence, bhava. With existence as condition, birth, jati. With birth as condition, aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair would come to be. Such would be the such would be the origin of this whole mass of suffering. So here we've got an excerpt from Paticca Samuppada, from the law of dependent origination. And the Buddha's making a direct link between clinging and birth. So this is upadana paccaya bhava, bhava paccaya jati, so birth. Jati paccaya jara maranam soka parideva dukkha domanassa payasa how is it? Sampavanti, something like that. So he's talking about the last links of dependent origination that start from birth and lead on to more suffering in this round of samsara whenever there's clinging to any one of these 5 khandhas. So then he carries on. What do you think, monastics? Is form permanent or impermanent? Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Are volitional formations or will permanent or impermanent? And is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Do you all know the answer?
Impermanent.
Venerable Sir. Impermanent, Venerable Sir. And then the next question is, what is impermanent, suffering or happiness? You know the answer? Shout it out.
Suffering.
Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent, suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine. This I am. This is myself. No, Venerable Sir. Seeing thus, one understands there is no more for this state of being. So there we end with a mini version of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, which goes through all of these 5 components of existence and questions them in this way, asking, is this permanent or impermanent? Impermanent. When something's impermanent, is that suffering or happiness? Inevitably suffering, because we try to cling. Is what is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine. This I am. This is myself. So there is the sutta, and it would be wonderful to try to understand this a little bit more deeply, because of course we can give the correct answers, but the only way that the teaching actually leads to liberation is if we truly see this at the depth. And that just doesn't mean seeing one khandha, one aspect of existence as suffering or impermanent or non-self, but seeing every aspect of what we take to be existence as impermanent, suffering, and non-self. And the reason this is cannot be called a view of existence or a view of extermination is because actually there's no being as such to be found. It's just an impermanent and conditioned process. So that is what dependent origination is pointing to. It's pointing to how there can be rebirth without a self. Yeah, it's a causal process that doesn't require a self or a soul to take place. So it's quite a deep sutta, and it'll be interesting to come in at any point, really. The sutta number and name, start at the beginning, is Samyutta Nikaya number 22, chapter 22. That's the Khandhasamyutta, and it's number 80, the Alms Gatherer. Okay, I thought this might come up. So there's already a question here, which is a very interesting question. Is what is impermanent necessarily suffering? Isn't it only in the clinging to it where the suffering comes in? That's very good. So this is quite a common question, and it's not that I have seen this through deep insight that ends all suffering, but from what I can understand from my practice so far is that impermanence is always necessarily suffering. Because if there's pleasure there, it's not going to last. If there's suffering there, it's also going to change, but it's only going to change into another form of suffering. So I think when we see the depth of suffering, we start to realize that, everything that we kind of experience in this world is actually impermanent and cannot satisfy us. So at first, it's very obvious that the clinging to what is obviously changing causes suffering. But after a while, as the practice deepens, we start to realize that every experience by itself is unsatisfactory. And this is perhaps a little bit scary to hear, but this comes about usually only through a deep sense of letting go and a lot of stability, a lot of samadhi in the mind. So much so that you realize the more you let go of, the more happiness you feel. And when things like the body and the breath start to fade, there's even more happiness than when the body is there to experience. I mean, many of us can experience that even at a fairly gross level. For example, if you have a lot of aches and pains in your body, and you might find you can't relieve those aches and pains even by lying down, but eventually you manage to fall asleep and relief. You might wake up and there's a little bit of like a warm sort of tingling feeling in the body. Ajahn Brahm always says that. He says, just enjoy that feeling when you wake up in the morning. And I'm like, yeah, it lasts about a minute and then I start to get gastric problems. So, even kind of just, but the point is that when something that is suffering ends, we can experience the contrast by the absence of suffering. So bit by bit, we get a kind of refined taste for happiness, if that makes sense. And obviously clinging doesn't only cause suffering, but as soon as clinging arises, you're separated from what you want. Clinging cannot arise in a mind that's content. So clinging is the arising of suffering, which is another translation for samudaya, the second noble truth. The cause of suffering, or the arising of suffering the arising of clinging is suffering. Samudaya means cause, but it also means the arising itself. And unfortunately, it's very hard to experience ourselves in this world, what we take to be a self, without clinging to it, isn't it? Is there anything we can truly say we've understood to be non-self? Would you prefer your body to be this way or that way? Most of us say, well, I prefer it to be that way, without the disease, without the tiredness, always full of energy. Yeah, the clinging to that makes it worse. But certainly there's some suffering just in having a body. And the same with the other khandhas, I noticed for myself, especially when I was doing a lot of Vipassana practice, that sometimes there's a lot of sensations my predominant experience is sensations that could be classed as pleasant. They're very subtle, they're very light, they're arising and passing, they're impermanent. But after a while, it's agitating for the mind. And I know for me, I kind of started seeing the impermanent nature at such a speed, such a velocity, that it was really, I was starting to think, isn't this impermanence also impermanent? Is there an end to this, or is impermanence permanent? When is this impermanence going to end? Because impermanence itself is a kind of unrest, in a sense. And I remember, starting to hear the talks of some of the forest teachers, like Ajahn Mahabura, who is not one of my main teachers now, but at the time it really made sense. He said, when you're doing a lot of practice into really focusing on impermanence and suffering, especially, it's important to rest the mind in states of samadhi, because at least in those samadhi states, the suffering of impermanence of the body and feeling in the body temporarily ends. So it's not a negative teaching. It's actually a teaching that there's something much more. There's something much calmer, quieter, more nourishing, and more trustworthy than any of the happiness, with or without clinging, that we can have in the five sense world. But I'd say most of the time there's a subtle clinging in the mind that we maybe haven't yet seen. Yeah. Just to add to that, actually, I think one of the reasons that this question comes up quite often is because of one of the translations of the five khandhas as the Pancha Upadana khandhas, so the five aggregates subject to clinging. But it doesn't mean attachment to the five khandhas. It actually means the khandhas that are subject to clinging, that almost arise with clinging. So it's, again, dependently originated, that clinging leads to the arising of these khandhas. And again, that's what dependent origination is all about. How from delusion we get consciousness, and all the other links follow. Vijapacchaya Sankhara, first of all. Sankhara Paccaya Vijnana. And from the time consciousness, I mean, basically it all leads to a massive suffering, so long as there's no insight into the Dhamma. Yeah. Does that make some sense? Yeah. And in the room also, if there's anything you want to add or share, please just stick your hand up. Include your comments as well. So please don't feel you've got to have anything clever or academic to ask or say. This can really relate to your everyday life. And I don't know how many of you have the book in front of you right now, but I think it's quite interesting also to, just to look at some of the other things that are discussed here. I mean, the first bit that stood out for me is how, being a monastic myself, how quite often people in the world around us, maybe even spiritual people, might look upon us with, what's the word? Condemnation in a way, right? Even the Venerable Sariputta's mother, she was disgusted by her son for many, many years. He was like the second right-hand disciple of the Buddha, foremost in wisdom, a wisdom equal to that of the Buddha himself. And his mother abandoned him. She basically said, "You useless alms gatherer, you know, just like a beggar on the street." And when he would come to her house to receive the meal, she would basically throw it in his bowl along with plenty of abuse. And he would just calmly and quietly receive the food, wishing her well, wishing her merits. And it wasn't until the end of his life when he was passing away and the Devas came to pay respect to her son that she realized, oh my goodness, these heavenly beings are coming to pay respect to my own human son. And then she realized that he was actually, a saintly being. And she gained faith and I think realized stream winning. Before he entered Parinibbana. So it's quite interesting because, in a sense, alms mendicants give up so much, right? And it says here it's not because they've been driven to it by thieves or debt or fear or to earn a livelihood. Many monastics are highly educated. They were living really, really wholesome and, by worldly standards, very successful lives. And yet they do so with the thought, I am immersed in birth, aging, and death, in sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair. And that part of the Paticcasamuppada, the part that goes from birth all the way through to the despair and the rebirth as well. I'm immersed in suffering, oppressed by suffering. And perhaps an ending of this entire mass of suffering might be discerned. I love this because I kind of felt this when I was younger, I'm immersed in suffering, maybe not only my own, but the suffering of others seemed to weigh so heavily on me. Just what you read about in the news, when you really imagine what human beings are capable of doing to each other. We can see it in the world around us now. In many, many different countries, but obviously certain places stand out. The troubles in Palestine, it's basically a genocide. Innocent people being killed, babies being starved, aid being refused to come in, people being relocated to homes that I think I read 83% of the buildings have already been destroyed, So it's the suffering there. Maybe we're fortunate enough right now to be safe, to be well fed, to be around our loved ones, but others' suffering is, in a sense, our own. It's the suffering of humanity. It can happen to us. But this arising of faith, perhaps an ending might be discerned. And it's in this way that a person goes forth. And yet still, we have work to do. Okay, so I'm going to stop and come to Casey. Be nice to have some discussion. Hi. Oh, yes, I can hear you. Yeah, I think my speakers are not very high.
So something I noticed in the sutta is I was interested when the Buddha points out that the monastic who is still, kind of caught in these wrong intentions of unhelpful ways of thinking, both misses out on the pleasures of household
Yeah.
life and also can't fulfill the goal of the monastic life. So I wonder, I'm just curious about, I'd be interested to hear some of your reflections on this. Is this a warning not to go forth if you're not ready, or is it kind of encouragement that if
Right.
you've gone forth to really focus on these right intentions, or what can we get from
Yeah.
this piece?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because it is that kind of sticky, uncomfortable place between having given up so much and a lot of comfort and a lot of pleasure, a lot of easy distractions, as I said, and yet turning inward to see that the mind is a mess, right? Have you ever done that on a meditation retreat? You thought, oh, great, I'm on retreat now. Oh, peace and quiet. And you look inside, oh, is it getting worse? Probably not. It's just that you've actually turned your mind inwards. It's like having a magnifying glass on the workings of your mind. And actually, those tendencies were already there. They were always there and they were running your life. You just didn't see it because you were staying in your comfort zone. So, if we had to be pure before we would go forth, no one would be able to take up the training. And yet, I think, the context of this sutta is very beautiful because it talks about the Buddha coming out of his seclusion to help these newly ordained monastics. So, something about that speaks to the importance to me of conditions that will support you to face what's inside and to encourage you, to guide you, to inspire you, to keep on developing faith and to keep on working with our mind. So faith is very important, keeping the perspective that there may be perhaps an ending of this entire mass of suffering. And of course, if you're around someone like the Buddha, it's in your face. It really is possible. And, even today we can meet good monastics, maybe not enlightened, but sometimes they are, more than partway there. And it's incredibly inspiring to hear that, hey, when they were younger, they were just like us. They talk about their early years of monastic life. Even Ajahn Brahm, although he didn't have problems with lust, he still did get attacked by it a couple of times. And it was really painful because he wanted to be a monastic. He didn't want to be besieged by these thoughts. And of course, from my own experience too, there are times that I don't really have so much, I don't know, maybe I'm in denial, not so much lust for sexuality, because that's, it's been many years since I've been ordained. And I felt that I'd kind of already been burned in that realm in lay life quite enough. But sometimes, depending on the challenges as well, it may be that the mind has reached a point where it's really peaceful and fairly balanced, and you barely see the hindrances arising, sometimes for many months. But then when you're in a different situation, which is a little bit more demanding, guess what? The trigger can be there. And then you see those same roots have not been taken out. And so it's really important at that time to understand that you're just going deeper. It's not that you're, going backwards in any way. It's just that more is being revealed to you. And it's so easy if you're in, a very simple lifestyle to believe that you're actually already there. Not that I ever believed that, but I have heard from people who, believed that they were fully enlightened for quite a number of years before. I think it was Venerable Pema Siri. He was a famous Sri Lankan monk who passed away fairly recently. And there's a lovely little documentary which shows an interview with him saying that he believed for many years that he was fully enlightened until one day he was walking down a little forested path in Sri Lanka and he saw what he thought was a snake. And suddenly this fear arose in him, really visceral fear. And I think more than the fear of the snake was the shock that he wasn't enlightened. And he said that he literally had to trace his practice back to find out where he'd made his mistake. And he did end up redefining, I think, what mindfulness really means and really going back to those foundations. So yes, here it's talking about that. And sometimes, it's in the present tense. So it says a person who has lost for sensual pleasures, muddle-minded, lacking clear comprehension, has missed out on the enjoyments of a householder, yet does not feel the goal of asceticism. I think it means yet, has not fulfilled it yet. because the Buddha told us clearly that it's possible to cultivate wholesome states. It's possible to reach the end of suffering for anyone with faith, for anyone with, good faculties, with the faculties intact, who comes across the Dhamma. It's possible to go all the way. So yes, then he starts to talk about the 3 kinds of unwholesome thoughts and how we can overcome them through the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or through developing this deep, deep samadhi as a much more permanent way to overcome them. So we start off with, temporary relief, a temporary abandoning of the hindrances, and we start to experience the pleasure of that, the relief of that, the absence of suffering, and the mind starts to see the futility and the sheer madness in allowing those states to take hold of the mind. So this is how we gradually come out. And it's interesting that he talks about those thoughts. Sometimes those thoughts are actually, sometimes they're talked about as thoughts. Sometimes the translation is thoughts. Sometimes it's talked about as intention. It's the second factor of the path, identical to that. Right thought is the opposite of right intention, is the opposite of sensual thought. It's thoughts of renunciation as opposed to sensuality. Yeah. Another one is intentions of loving kindness rather than ill will, and intentions of compassion or harmlessness rather than thoughts of harming. So working with those thoughts is a wonderful way to start aligning our minds with right intention. And it's also a way of meeting those hindrances that arise. There's a lot that can be said about all of this, but I hope that's holds together somehow. I'm still quite jet lagged, so please forgive me if I'm not quite coherent or not quite concise enough. Okay, coming to Shirley. Hi, Shirley.
Thank you, Venerable. Really interesting discussion. I want to, and I'm so glad you're back. It's so nice. I love this Friday night discussion.
Excellent.
So this is really on a bit of a different tack, but it's about what you said about the immense suffering of the world, things that are going on. And sometimes I just feel that, that thing where there are four mountains coming on.
Yeah.
Which is meant to be, as the Buddha was talking about death, illness and things, but I sort of feel it's climate change, the refugee problem. Well, no, it's not a problem. The problem people have, the hatred around refugees, this sort of hatred that's being stoked, that is, and I read recently that even charities, refugee charities, women's charities, are now being targeted and abused, and racist graffiti stuck on them. Just so many really quite horrible and quite disgusting things happening. The inequality and the risk, and the risk of war. So there's all these horrible things, and sometimes I just feel they're all
coming at once.
There's fear that comes up in me.
Yeah, of course.
So, just an absolute overwhelming sense of the suffering, and but also the perpetrators, because when you start to notice how sweet it is to be compassionate, kind, generous, and you feel that these people are just
please carry on. I just hit the bell by accident. Yes.
Driven by, all this hatred and greed and violence. It just must be so horrible in their heads.
Of course.
So I sort of look at clinging, and I sort of see this wish to fix the world, and I know that that's my clinging that has to be let go of, because otherwise I'm just going to suffer.
Well, yeah. I mean, everything you say.
Sorry, can I just say? But my question really is from that is, there are beautiful states of mind that can be a sort of refuge, like all the parami. Should we cling to them? Is it right to cling to them? I know they're impermanent because they're not always there until we're enlightened. But in a way, can we sort of cling to them? That's what my question was. Reflection on that, please. I'd enjoy that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everything you say is true. And it can be overwhelming. And I think that's where that simile comes in. And it's a really evocative simile, the whole world is being swept away and the mountains are kind of coming in and crushing us. And of course, that relates to everything you just said, because the outcome of much of this is, that it puts us or others face to face with death. And the perpetrators not only will die, just as everyone else will die, but they'll also have to suffer their bad karma in their rebirth, whether we believe in that or not. I mean, how can there be a good outcome of their actions? It's impossible. If a mind is fueled by hate, delusion, greed, the wish to oppress, then that pattern is so gross, so coarse that it's going to continue. And unfortunately, they're far from the Dhamma. So we do have to have, or it will be, appropriate to have compassion for them. But I think, firstly, we need to have compassion for our own suffering around all of this. And I think, yes, one aspect of that is resourcing ourselves through the qualities of loving kindness, compassion, the practice of the Brahma Viharas, the practice of the paramis that you mentioned, qualities like generosity, equanimity, wisdom, patience, virtue, etc. And that will help us be more resourced. Whether we cling to them or not, I don't know if the language of clinging is necessarily helpful, but in a sense, it's a bit like the simile the same teacher, Ajahn Mahaprabhu, told me when I went to see him. I said, I'm very attached to my teacher. Is this bad? This was my preceptor in Myanmar. And he said, no. I mean, not no or yes, but in a sense, one has to, to climb a ladder, you have to hold on to the rung that you're on. Your foot has to be firm on that rung, and you have to hold on to the ladder in order to pull yourself to the next rung. When you're at the next rung, you hold on to the one above and you pull yourself up. So in that sense, we use these practices as a kind of temporary refuge for the mind, something to kind of keep us above water. And of course, from time to time, the head's going to go down. This is what happens until we're stream winners. Our head is sometimes above the water, but our head sometimes goes underneath as well. And I suppose it's important to notice when that's about to happen and to somehow use a remedial action, actually take some time out for ourselves. And that might mean removing ourselves from the news for a while. It's okay to do that, right? It's not that every time we read the news, it's going to issue in a really helpful response. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we can sign a petition, or we find a charity that we can donate to. We might even be inspired to go out on the field, who knows, or go out and in the Defend Our Juries protest. I know you do a lot of activism in person, which is really admirable, but you can't always do that. So we have to take the long-term picture, and keep ourselves resourced. And I think it's wonderful that you're able to hold in your heart, that compassion for those who we consider the perpetrators of violence and oppression, because they are also suffering immensely, not only physically, not only with a loss of safety or even food, but also with the deprivation of the mind, a mind that's really lost its way. So yeah, take those breaks. It's so important. I don't know if this is answering your question, but I guess in a way, yes, taking refuge in the Dhamma at times when things are hard. I mean, I know for myself, sometimes I can get to the point of almost overwhelm before I take a rest or just pull back. Sometimes it's just around surviving as a bhikkhuni, but it's also amplified by the suffering in the world, right? Of course, because as a teacher, I'm helping people to do whatever they do. I'm not necessarily able to go out on every protest, but a lot of the people I teach do. And so indirectly, we're very much involved. And as a bhikkhuni also, you meet a lot of people who suffer from all kinds of psychological distress. And it can be easy to think, I'll just keep going, I'll just keep working. without stopping before we get overwhelmed. So I think being more gentle is really important, because we tend to push ourselves hard. Yeah. I don't know if that's really directly answering the question, but I hope there's something in there. And I like the next question. It kind of builds on that in a way. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Could one say that suffering is one of the greatest causes for achieving liberation from samsara? And I think I would love to just give an outright yes, but there is a caveat, and that is that, first of all, we don't create suffering or condone suffering. The aim is to try and alleviate suffering wherever we can, both in others and in ourselves, in the world, in the planet, in the environment, etc. But suffering, if we meet the Dhamma, it's these two ingredients. It's experiencing suffering and then that giving rise to confidence in the Dhamma that is a cause for liberation. And there's actually a sutta about this. It's not the Avijja Sutta, but it's similar, about basically the sequence is something like, from suffering, one gains confidence in the teachings, but reading in the gradual training, it's clear there's another link in between, which is hearing the Dhamma. Okay, so from suffering, we hear the Dhamma. When we hear the Dhamma, we gain confidence in the Dhamma, because we have some experience of suffering and the need to emerge from that. Yeah, so that's exactly what's pointed to here. I'm immersed in suffering. Perhaps an ending of this entire mass of suffering might be discerned. And then the Buddha comes along and gives the teaching. So we have to hear the Dhamma. And then from gaining confidence in that Dhamma, joy arises. Yeah. It's slightly different in two different suttas. Another one is like that, from the suffering, sila, virtue arises. But they all come together. When you gain confidence in the teachings, you gain confidence in practicing them, which means purifying body, speech, and eventually mind. And so joy arises from this. That's called pamoja. And from that joy, rapture arises, piti. And this is where it starts to move into the kind of meditative experience that's possible based on an experience of suffering and confidence with that sila as a base. From rapture, what is it next? Piti, I think possibly tranquility, and then sukha, happiness. I think tranquility is in this sequence. Happiness, and then samadhi. So here also the Buddha's talking about a kind of samadhi, which is a very deep samadhi, probably closer to an actual experience of nibbana itself. But in this sutta, it's from samadhi that we gain insight into the way things are. So yatha bhuta jnana dassana, seeing things as they are. From that, a kind of dispassion and a fading, leading to nirodha, cessation of suffering. And the knowledge of that cessation, the knowledge of liberation. So, yes, I think suffering, and especially insight into suffering, is probably the cause for liberation from samsara. Obviously, the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha teaches are to be understood. So he's not only telling you to see suffering, but he's also showing us how to understand it. And it's when we've actually understood it completely that stream winning is realized. With the understanding of suffering completely comes the understanding of its cause and also how to remove that cause. So all Four Noble Truths come together. Yeah. Okay, so just a follow on from Shirley's question. Very helpful. Thank you. Now I'm getting older, I'm doing less and less. It's more inner work. Fantastic. And do try to include in that inner work all the wonderful outer work that you've done. Bring it up in your mind, however small and insignificant it might seem, it isn't. You cannot really gauge the powerful ripple effects that every action, towards peace, towards justice, towards climate justice is. You've probably inspired many, many people. I know you inspire everyone here, at least me, and I'm sure many other people here. So really use that as a foundation to develop that inner joy and to allow that joy to quieten and soften your mind so that you easily gain samadhi. And you also said that you particularly like the simile of hanging on to the rungs of the ladder. It's good, isn't it? And at the top of that ladder, I don't know what happens, but I guess you kind of fly. I don't know, that sounds nice to me. You just come to the top and let go. Good. So we still have 5 more minutes or so. Yeah. Is there anything else anyone would like to draw on in this sutta, or anything from your daily life that you'd like to bring up? Can be your practice, can be your day-to-day. Anything from here? Fly away to Nibbana. Yeah. Cease without remainder. How does that sound? I love that. I love talk of cessation. And it's not annihilation. Annihilationism. It's just the ending of suffering, the ending of a process. Great. Excellent. You got it. Wonderful. Yeah. Because whatever's ceasing is just suffering. That's all. It's just suffering arising, suffering passing away, as the Bhikkhuni Vajra says in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Actually, I'm not sure it's in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Was it in the Therigatha? Yeah, that's Ajahn Brahm's one of his favorite quotes from any enlightened monastic, the Bhikkhuni Vajra. Mara said, "Who do you think you are, Bhikkhuni?" And she said, "This is just suffering arising, suffering passing away, that's all. No more identification with any of the 5 khandhas." I will maybe, if there's no more questions, just mention that a little practice that I found really powerful during my rains retreat was to actually actively contemplate the impermanence and the non-self nature of these 5 khandhas. And I think it was last year that I was quite sick and couldn't really do a lot of sitting meditation, which made me panic at first because that's sort of my preferred posture. But it gave me the opportunity to get into some walking meditation. And I also knew that the suffering around not being able to sit, and especially the bodily sickness that I experienced, was exacerbated by, the sense of self, the sense of this being me and my problem. So I actually asked myself questions around based on the Anatalakkhana Sutta as I was walking on my path. And there's a few more suttas that show different questions to ask around non-self. So basically, I would walk up and down, and rather than just tell myself, form is non-self, feeling is non-self, I actually ask myself, is form self? Does it belong to a self? Is it mine? Am I in form? Is form in me? And there were these 5 ways of inquiring, and it was really interesting. I would ask the one question, is form a self, or is body a self? I think I used body because it's just more direct. And just walk with that and see, how much clinging was there. Or just allow that question to work at a deeper level of the mind whilst calming the mind. Is body mine? It's slightly different. Do I appropriate the body? Do I think I own it, control it, possess it? And I went through each and every khandha like this, and it's very interesting. When I got to Sankhara, actually, like, is Sankhara mine, or am I Sankhara? That was harder, because quite often we do think we are our karma, we are the karma formation, we are our volition, our will. It was really interesting to notice, that there was a little bit more clinging to some of those components of existence, those khandhas, than to others. So that might be a practice that you'd like to try, if ever the conditions seem to invite it. Thank you, Casey. Suffering arising, suffering passing away. It is in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. Beautiful. In the last verse. So, good. Last comments. How do you feel? Is the Dhamma, does it quench suffering to some degree? Does it uplift the mind? You're welcome to write in the chat any comment. it sounds like such a relief to me, that when we realize that there's no point searching for happiness in the realm of suffering. And there is actually no self to perfect. It feels really a big relief for me. Okay, so someone else said that they feel motivated, and someone else is grateful. I try not to read your names. I hope you don't mind, just because sometimes people want to be more anonymous. Thank you, feeling quiet and at ease, hearing the Dhamma. Big change from inner restlessness, initial restlessness. Excellent. It's really good. And if you feel confused and miserable, that's okay as well. Usually one sermon was not enough to enlighten the monks and nuns. So if you're already enlightened, I'll be amazed and very happy for you. What happiness to know there's no happiness in the world. Yes. Joy at last, I think it was, to know there's no happiness in the world. That was Ajahn Chah indeed. And there's a lovely picture of that in Ajahn Brahm's office. He took, I gave him my laptop during my retreat because I didn't want to, have any excuse or reason to look at it or possibility of looking at it. So when I went to retrieve it, I saw this lovely picture on his shrine, Ajahn Chah like this. Joy at last, to know there's no happiness in the world. Yeah. So we can unpack all our unrealistic expectation and just realize there's nothing wrong with us. There's another happiness to be found that far surpasses any happiness in the world. And that can be found through practicing virtue, practicing stillness, and practicing wisdom, insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self.